So when I visit a kehillah, and I'm not here, I'm not giving a shit every month, and I hope to be back again. B'siyata d'shmaya, she'kodesh Baruch Hu to give us good health, and we should be able to keep up our boss's Torah. But I want to, like to have the maximum benefit out of my shiur. So I'm not going to speak about the gewisse sugya, a gewisse shach or a gewisse taz, but rather what we will be discussing is the concept of Heter Iska. I don't know whether you're up to that or not, but sooner or later, every kohen learns Hilchos. This is one of the most important sugyas in Hilchos, which is the Heter Iska. And the Heter Iska has evolved and developed since it was first conceived ad liyameinu eila. And as in most any other sphere, there's Ashkenazi Heter Iska and a Sephardi Heter Iska, which people aren't aware of. But the first two Heter Iskas are the Trumas Edition and the Mabit, the Ashkenazi one and the Sephardi one, which are two totally different concepts. One is based on a Gemara of Mitzvah, and the other on a Gemara of Kama. So we will go through the various stages of the Heter Iska, from the Trumas Edition and Shin Beis, who was the very first Godel that came up with this idea, ad liyameinu eila. But first, what does the Heter Iska mean? Now, why was there a need for a Heter Iska? How did it come to be? How was the Heter Iska born? It is Baruch Kishemesh that the Heter Iska was not made for real Iskas. An Iska is an Iska, it doesn't need a Heter Iska. The Heter Iska is a formula that's, in a way, Bule Tayres Sheretz Manatayr. And the Gedolim in their ages saw just what Hillel HaZokan saw, B'tchilas Tkufas HaTanoim. There is a mitzvah of Shmitas Sofim, and Shmitas Sofim was supposed to be to the benefit of the Aniyim. You took a loan, you can't pay that loan. So once in 7 years, it's annulled, and you start anew. Hillel HaZokan realized that it's hurting the Aniyim instead of giving them benefit, because nobody wanted to give loans. Ra Hillel HaZokan shenimnahu omer halvois, Omad v'hitkin possible to circumvent, to get around Shmitas suffering. Because the mitzvah that the Fi Ruach HaTorah was supposed to benefit the Aniyim ultimately hurt the Aniyim, and nobody wanted to lend the money. And the same thing happened with Ribbis. Torah asks Ribbis, and the Kodesh Baruch Hu expects us to give Gimalis Sodom and to give loans without Ribbis. But Gedolim saw that the Isser Ribbis doesn't enable the flow of capital, the flow of money, and therefore they looked for a way to get around the Isser of Ribbis, that people should be willing to lend money and not to lose their money. So the Trumas Edition is the first that comes up with the idea based on Samach Testament Beis and Bava Metzia. Rav Choma have a moiger zizah b'pshita. Rav Choma lent zuzah, and his condition was, when you give me back my zuzim, you should add on a fruitus. Kisava, maishnu mamora. Rav Choma argued, why is money different than schiras kalim? Why would money be different than a tool or a shovel or anything else? If I lend you something, a chayfetz, you pay rental. So why would the ribbis be different? The kol zuzov shel Rav Choma, and Rav Choma pours money, yoreg letimyan, it went down the drain. And the Gemara says, no, Rav Choma had a real mistake. Money is not like a mora, it's not like a kli. Mora hadra be'einei, it's, you took the kli, you enter the car, and you give back the car. You enter the house, you give back the house. You have schiras kalim, you enter a kli, whatever kli it is, and hadra be'einei, via de'apachse, and there is also wear and tear, and that is why it's justified to pay rent. Zuzah lo hadra be'einei, ve'ein pchaz bezuzah, and therefore, that is ribbis. What was Rav Chomes Chava in there? Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi says, Loshon Schiras. Now, Pashtas Divrei Rashi Mashma, it all depends on words. It depends on formula. If you lend money and you ask for interest, that is an issue. That's the issue of Ribbis. But Rav Chuma rented out money. He didn't lend money. He rented out money. Loshon Schiras, and therefore he thought it's just like Schiras Batim, Schiras Poyalim, Schiras Kalim, and any other Schiras. Chuvas HaRashba Miyochosas LaRamban. We still call these Chuvas Miyochosas LaRamban, but we know with clarity these are Chuvas HaRashba. Chuvas HaRashba Miyochosas LaRamban, Reish Chov Gimel. The Rashba says, Ribbis is actually Schiras. And that is why the entire world, besides Shomer mitzvahs, they don't see anything wrong with interest. Nowhere in the world do you expect to get a loan without paying interest. So why would Schiras Mois be different than Schiras Batim, Schiras Kelim, Schiras Vayim, Schiras Poyalim? You don't expect a person to let you live in one of his houses without paying rent. A good friend will give you his car for a day, but you don't get a car for a month or for 2 months without paying rent. And the Rashba says, Ribbis is Schiros. Why would you expect a person to give you his money for a month or 2 or a year without paying for that money? And one of the great Talmud Chacham 100 years ago wrote in his Sefer that today there should be no Isser Ribbis because it is a customary and it is accepted in the entire world, and he made a terrible mistake. Dinei Torah, and Torah doesn't, social norms can't change din diuraisa. And I explain to my talmidim when we learn Hilchos Yodu Torah l'sov da'atei shalom. Kodesh Baruch Hu knows what his Torah is and what the rationale of his mitzvahs are. When you rent a house and you can't afford it, you're not going to rent a penthouse on the top floor of Manhattan or a little Yechidat Diur in Ramat Eshkol. You know that you can't afford it. You can't afford it. And Yechidat Diur, 2.5 room, 50 square meter in Ramat Eshkol would cost approximately what a penthouse would cost in Manhattan. So if you don't have the money and you can't afford it, you're going to rent a cheaper house. If you can't afford it, you're not going to rent a Porsche or a Ferrari. You're going to rent, in Israel, there's a type of car called Subaru Avreichim. That's a type of car, it's a Subaru Avreichim. What is unique about the car, not only it looks great, it also smells great. And before you sit down, you need to clean the seats from the remnants of biscuit and bamba and popcorn and other things that little kids have in a little car. So if you can't afford it, you're not going to rent an expensive car and not an expensive house. But a person that's pressed for cash will promise anything you demand to get that money. And there's always greedy people that will take advantage of your desperation. And that is why the Torah aser the Ribbis. It's, by the very nature, it's Schiras. It's just like any other Schiras. But there's a reason why Ribbis is an Aveda. It's not the Gzeres Akosa like Shatnez or Poraduma, which is Chukim Chokakti V'Gveres Luzarti. So coming back to Rav Chome's mistake, what was Rav Chome's mistake? And he lost his money. Rashi says, Loshen Schiras. Tosfos says, Kibel olav achrayus onsen. And that is not the standard halavor. When you lend money, you need to give that money back. And it doesn't matter to the lender why this money was lost. But because a shomer is potem en onsen, shoyel chayav ba'onsen, milvelaitzoatnei. The moment you borrowed the money is yours, and you need to give back that loan. Rav Chome, and he pattered the borrower from achrayus onsen, and therefore he thought that's a pekodin. And a pekodin, I'm allowed to take money, just like a shomer sochav. A pekodin, I'm allowed to take money. I don't lend him that money. He is like my shaliach. It's a pekodin. He works for me, and therefore I can take the profit. Tosfos and the Tumas Hadeshen says, Rav Chuma's mistake was kibbul olavacha zonsen. Ilu hoya makabel atzmecha is gneva v'aveda as well. It would be mutar, and that's the shit of the Tumas edition. So that's the Tumas edition's Heter Iska, which means that the mashkia, the one that gives the money, or the lender, makabel atzmoi, if this money is lost, will bear no responsibility. Neither onsen, that was Rav Chuma's mistake, neither gneva v'aveda. However, where's the catch? Tumas edition has a stipulation. But if you argue that the money was lost, you need to prove it. And you need to prove it al yedei harav v'hashatz shebekiem ktsas b'masa v'makin shel b'nei hu'iyah. And that's a very interesting formula. So the Tumas edition clearly writes, I want a formula that will solve the problem kemat betochen gomer. That's the lashon of the shaila. And as we know, the Tumas edition, these were not questions that people actually asked him. He formulated the shailas and the shuas. And in the shaila he asks himself, is there a way to guarantee for the investor kemat betochen gomer that he will not lose the keren? And in the tshuva, he writes, I have a formula which will give him total security. He has nothing to be afraid of. So what's his formula? First of all, the heter, to invest money, and you take upon yourself all achrayis, unsen and gneva v'aveda. So why would anybody invest money with another when the lender or the borrower takes no responsibility for his money? Tumas edition makes it almost impossible for him to prove that he lost the money. And you will need to bring the Rav and the Shochet, or the Rav and the Chazan, and they will give Eidus that you lost this money. So how would the Rav and the Shliach be able to give Eidus? So it's unrealistic. And that is the Heter Iska of the Tumas edition. It's somewhat of a mystery when he says the Rav and the Shliach Tzibah shebekiyam tzas b'masa v'makin shel b'nei ha'iyah, which means there must be some element of reasonability or real. It cannot be a total fantasy, because then it would not be a Heter Iska, that would be Ribbis. And therefore he writes, the Rav and the Shliach Tzibah, they know somewhat about the dealings of B'nei Ha'iyah, but on the other hand, how would they be able to testify that the money was lost? And that is the idea of the Tumas edition, which will give the investor or the lender a very high level of security and confidence that he will not lose his money. But let us note that the Tumas edition, Beferish, is talking only about the keren. There is no guarantee that you will make revach, that you will make a profit. He never intended to guarantee a profit. That would be Ribbis. However, you could make money, and it's not korav l'schar v'korav l'hefsid. It's rochik m'hefsid v'korav l'schar. That would be an iser, and after piken. So the Tumas edition writes, by our agreement, korav l'schar v'korav l'hefsid. L'hefach. It is korav l'hefsid yoysim l'schar. Because you bear no responsibility. I am responsible, and if the money is lost, regardless how it's lost, I am losing my money. But he makes it impossible for you to prove that the money was lost, and that is a technicality. That is the Tumas edition's Heter Iska. The Mabit, 100 years later than the Tumas edition, Chelak Aleph Kuf Ayin Tes, comes up with a totally different idea based on Bava Basra Kuf Yud. When a person is mafkid mos etzel chavei to invest, and they have a business, a shared business. Im shine medas hamafkid, im pirseloi, im oisiru beemtza. There might be a Bava Kama Gemara on the table. No, you don't need to make an effort in big one. So Tosius writes in Bava Kama Kuf Yud Weiss, Mikan yesh lohochiach. Mikan yesh lohochiach. If a person invested money with another for a profit. And you made a tanai. And Tosa says, a crazy tanai. You are not allowed to invest this money with anyone unless he gives you mashkoina shel kesev v'zohov. And you need to watch over my money, ve'ein lehem shmira elu b'karka. And the borrower, or the person that is supposed to run this business, we don't call him a borrower because it's mafkin noise, it's a pekodin. And the one that got the money and is supposed to invest the money was Meshana Medas Balabayis. In Pechesu Pechsuloi. He bears all the losses. And if there's a profit, the profit is Le'emsa. So the Mabit's understanding of this thesis is you could do that lechatchila. You make it tonight. Neither the investor nor the person that got the money have no intention of flipping that tonight. It's a crazy night. And if I'm supposed to bury the money bakarka, how am I supposed to make a profit? How am I supposed to make a profit? The tanoim that you stipulate are totally against our shared interest. You want me to invest the money and give you a profit. On one hand, you have a tanai. I can't give the money to anyone unless he gives me mashkoina shel kesef v'zohar, which is unrealistic. And then I need to bury the money. How do you expect me to make a profit? So that's the idea of the Mabit. Once again, mitzvah the tanai, it's not ribbis. It's not ribbis. I borrowed your money. We share the profits. We share the losses. But we both know you're going to be meshana medas balabayis. That is what I want you to do. And that's what you will do. That's what we have in mind. But it's not what we stipulate. And I give you money with crazy tanoim that'll make it impossible to make a profit. But that is the condition, and that is the stipulation. And our kavanah is you should be over on my tanai, and then you bear all the losses, and we share the profits. So the Heter Iska of the Mabit is a totally different concept than the Heter Iska of the Tumas Adeshen. It's a different idea. It guarantees the keren, it does not guarantee a profit. Years transpired, and the Gedolim realized to guarantee the keren is not enough. We need to find a way to be able to guarantee a profit for the investor. And that is where Tikkun Maharam was born. 100 years transpired after the Mabit and the Mendel Avigdor. That was his name. He was a Roman crocker. And that's the Tikkun Maharam of the Maharam crocker, the Mendel Avigdor. His Heter Iska is a combination of the previous two, of the Mabit and the Tumas Hadeshen. Nachla Shiva, Simen Mem. That is where we find the first nusach of the Mendel Avigdor of Tikkun Maharam. So the Gemara says, Machsa Milva, Machsa Pekodin, that is the real Iska. Half is Milva, half is Pekodin. And Milva, everything is on the Loiva, and the Pekodin is everything on the Malva. You know, he's my shliach. He's my shliach to take care of my money. The idea of the Mendel Avigdor is not Machsa Milva, Machsa Pekodin, but rather the first 6 months Pekodin and the next 6 months Milva. Which means the first 6 months, you invest my money and I get all the profits. You are my shliach. What's your part of the deal? Why should you work for nothing being my shliach? After we make a 10% profit or a 20% profit, the entire money is a milva. And that's your chance to make more money. But once we hit the 10% point or the 20% point, that is my money. That is totally my money. And from now on, you're a loiva. Even if you lose the money, I get back my money with a profit. And if there will be no profit, so the idea of the Nachlas Shiva is Pekodin, and we set a certain sum, that is the Revach HaMishuar, and when we reach that point, no longer Pekodin, and the entire money is mine, because as a Pekodin, you bear no responsibility. Losses and profits are upon me. But after 6 months, the money is yours, and that is when you make your profit. And now we come back to the Tumas Hadeshen. If you argue that you did not make a profit, you need to prove al yedei eidim ksherim shelo hirviach. So in the Tikkun Maharam, it's no longer the Shliach Tzibur and the Shoichet or the Rav. And why is that? Because you could find Eidim to testify that the money was lost. It is almost impossible for Eidim to know whether he made a profit or not. How would they know whether he made a profit or not? And therefore, Maharam Kroka saw no need to stipulate who the Eidim will be. But you need to prove with Eidim Shedim that you made no profit. And if you cannot prove, then you need to pay Revach HaMishuar. We both guess that will be 20% profit or 10% profit before it turns into a milva. And if you argue there was no profit, it is a haskoma beinenu that if you can't prove there was no profit, then there's a Revach Mishuar. And that's not Ribbis, because up to this stage it's a Pekodon. If it's a Pekodon, I made no profit, why do you deserve money? But we stipulated if you can't prove with Eidim Kshedim that you're paying more money, then this is the Revach Mishuar, and that is the idea of Tikkun Maharam. The Lavush in Kiv Samach Zayin brings Echod Min HaMoirim. He doesn't mention the Mendel Vigors by his name, but he tears this idea apart, and he says it's Ribbis Dioraisa. Because it is totally Rochek Min Hefsid. It is impossible for Adam to prove that he made no profit. Adam could prove sometimes that he made a profit. How could Adam know that he made no profit? I mean, I got money from another person. Nobody knows what I did with the money, where I invested the money. In Hilchos we have a call, Lo ru'inu eino raya. What you don't see, you don't know. And that is one of the three reasons that the Lavush writes, it's a Ribbis Ktsus. If I need to prove I made no profit, that is impossible. And because it's impossible, this doesn't make sense, and that makes it Ribbis Ktsus. The other argument, why the Lavush says that by guaranteeing a profit, Maharam crossed the red line. His predecessors, both the Mabit and the Tumas Hadeshen, only spoke about the keren, but guaranteeing a profit, and it is impossible not to pay that profit, that is Ribbis. Another difference between keren and profit is regarding the keren, the investor has a tanas body. Regarding the profit, he can never have a tanas body. It's always a tanas shema. And for these reasons, the Lavush goes against the Tikkun Maharam, and many others, including the Bach. Most of the Gedolim of that age came out against the Tikkun of the Maharam. The Mendel Vigdors backtracked, and he suggested formula number 2, which is Tikkunis Maharam number 2, which is different than number 1, slightly different. Moide b'mitzvahs. He didn't retract because he thought it is essential to guarantee a profit, and not like his predecessors, the Mabit and the Lavush, which just guaranteed the keren, that you will not lose money. And the difference between Tikkun Maharam number 1 and number 2 is, in a second Tikkun, if you want to argue you lost the money, you need Eidim Kshedim, the Rav and the Shliach Tzibur, just like with Tumas Hadeshen. If you want to argue that you made no profit, you need a Shavua Chamura. You don't need to prove, because it's impossible to prove that I made no money. Shavua Chamura. And knowing that people won't want to swear a Shavua Chamura, because Chazal say, Shvuas Hashem Tia Ben Shneim. And even a person that is nish v'shavus emes might bear very severe consequences. And Chazal come out against shavua, even a shavus emes. So Tikkun Maharam number 2 does differentiate between keren and revach. The keren, eidim kshedim, which is very difficult. Shliach Tzimmer and the Rav, and Revach, it's biyadoi. But we assume that he won't want to swear Shiur Weiss, which has been a Kippus Hefza in Beis HaKnesses, and that is formula number 2 of Tekones Maharam. The Lavush, arguing against the Mendel Avigdor, comes up with formula number 5. So we had Tumas Adesh and Mabit, which are 2 totally different approaches. One is based on Rav Choma, Rav Metzir Samach Tes, and the other, Rav Akama Kuf Yud Beis. Shkeno Medas HaMarked. The Mendel Avigdor, number 1 and number 2, slightly different, because the Lavush is so hostile to the Tikkun Maharam, he comes up with a totally new idea, which is called Takonas Zekut. And his idea is, the loiva wants to invest money, and the malva wants to invest money, and he wants to be confident that I'm going to make a profit. And the Lavush was also aware we need to guarantee a profit, and not only that he won't lose the kenan. So the Lavush says, the one getting the money, taking the loan, it's not a loan. He is selling schoira. It's a business deal. I'm going to send you 50 cars, 50 Mercedes. I'm going to send you a ton of grain. I'm going to sell you 10 cows. It's mecha. I will supply the cows in 6 months. And the price of a cow is so and so. Cheap price. And that is a mecha. And the Lavush says he needs to have that schoira or yotzor shar. It's available. And it's a mecha. And the condition is I need to supply that schoira in 6 months' time. If I don't supply you that schoira in 6 months' time, I will buy it back from you. And I will buy it back for twice the price I sold it to you. So the malva knows he's getting twice the price. But no halva is mentioned at all. It's a transaction. It's a business deal. I sell you for a low price, and if I don't supply that schoira, I'll buy it back for a higher price. Mekach umemkar. What? Yeah, like Mechiras Chumetz. It's what we do in Mechiras Chumetz, and nobody says that Mechiras Chumetz is Ribbis. Another reason it's not Ribbis, because Mechiras Chumetz usually is a goy to fire and not a eat. But it is exactly the same formula as Mechiras Chumetz. Yes, the goy pays 100 shekel, and 7 days later he gets 500 shekel. So that is the Kones Zikut, and that is the Lavush's formula. And this formula also developed, and it morphed. The Lavush says it is only if the loiva has schayra. If he doesn't have schayra, won't. Or Yosua Shan is available. The Taz Kufayin Aleph says that the minig is that even if he has nothing, Hoidos Baldin. Hoidos Baldin is enough. Hoidos Baldin, and he says, I have expensive diamonds. Everybody knows he has no diamonds, but Hoidos Baldin is enough. It is Machayev, and it is enough if it's just Hoidos Baldin, and the Taz, right, that's the minig. But the Taz comes out against the Lavush. And the Taz argues it is a haroma gemura. He doesn't have schoira. They don't mean schoira. The Lavush took his eitzah seriously, and the Lavush says that the loiva has an option to supply the schoira before payday is up, and then the malva will need to get those cows or that grain or whatever it is, what the schoira is. But the understanding is, I'm not a businessman. I don't deal with that schoira, and trust me, I'm not going to bring you 10 cows because I have no cows, But the Lavush stipulates, if it's a mekech umemkar, then yes, the loiva has the option of giving schoira. But if he doesn't give that schoira at the designated date, he will buy it back. And the Lavush thought that his Eitzah is better than Tekonis Maharam, but he generated much more flack than Tekonis Maharam. And the Chochmas Sodom in Mishpatei Tzedek comes out very strongly against, and he says it's Migdolam Aporchim Ba'avio, and most of the Gedolim come out against Tekonis Maharam. There's a Sefer Lechem Aponim. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Sefer, with the son-in-law of the Magen Avraham. And he writes that he heard from the Chelkas Machoikik that he's against this Tekona, and his Shver, the Magen Avraham, was against this Tekona. And the Chayodim writes, but that's the meaning in Vilna. And that's what everybody does in Vilna, even Talmidei Chachomim v'Yirei Shamayim. And I wonder how they rely on such a flimsy Heter. Everybody knows that it's not a Mecher and it's a Rama Gemura. And the Loive has no intention either of buying nor of selling. So many Gedolim came out against this, and the Chayodim just tries to be Malamet's host. How could Talmidei Chachomim Yirei Shamayim rely on this? So he says maybe they don't have parnasa, and he quotes the Sugyan Sanhedrin Daf Chavav. Hitiru avodas oras b'shvius mishum aranona. So 2 days in Toisus. And you said the Rabbanon, either because Shvius Bismana said the Rabbanon, or because we're dealing with avodas. Or it's just mid the Rabbanon, umechashash, Toisus writes, maybe even a Duraisa, pikuach nefesh, because if people won't be able to pay the taxes, some will be thrown into jail, and a Yid and a Goyish in jail is the Pidyon Shvurim, is pikuach nefesh. So the Chayodim writes, the only limit schus I have, maybe it's a Rabbanon, or it's just like if people are desperate and they're poor. Hitiru avodas oras b'shvius mishum aranon. So number 6 is the Heter Iska of the Chaya Odom, and that is what we have up to today. But every generation has its modifications and its minor changes. So the Chochmas Odom is a combination of the Tumas Adeshan and the Mabit, and that's the Chidush of the Chochmas Odom. So in the Heter Iska of the Chochmas Odom, he has an entire list of Tanoim, which are even more insane than what the Mabit wrote, which means I could leave your money with no one, and it needs to be in my bedroom and I sleep, and I cannot leave it even with my wife or children. Your money will be totally in my supervision. And these are Tanoim which are impossible to come by, and that is the Mabit. And if I say that your money was lost, I need to prove it, and every Erev Rosh Chodesh, I need to bring Eidim that I lost your money. And if the Eidim didn't come to shul to be made Erev Rosh Chodesh, it's a new loan. So if you argue that my money was lost, then you need to bring Eidim Ksherim in shul, b'shas Kriyas HaTorah, Erev Rosh Chodesh. So that is the Tanai of the Chochmas Odom. So on one hand, Tanoim that are impossible to come by, and that's the Mabit, together with the formula of the Tumas Adeshan, if you argue the money was lost. So the Chochmas Odom doesn't write the Rav and the Shliach Tzibur, but every Erev Rosh Chodesh, if you say you lost money, you need to come and prove. Revach, Shavua Chamura, which is the Mendel Avigdor's number 3. So the Chochmas Odom combined 3 different characteristics. Tumas Adeshan, Mabit, and the formula to guarantee Revach, that is Shavua Chamura. So when I taught in my koilov, I said, but no basin in the world today is mashpia. So the argument that was against Eidim Ksherim is even more powerful against Shavua. Yotzel attacking v'nimtza mekalko. Up to 100 years ago, Botedin was still a mashpia. Noide b'yudach, some soivi, even the hiouımhashchor writes that our minig is sometimes to be mashpia. No basin in the world today, it's noyeg b'shavua. And justly so. I wrote a lengthy tshuva why We are not Mashbiach Bisman. So all these Gedolim that write, if you want to cut yourself from the Keren, you can be giving Gelim Shalem. The Rav and the Shliach Zimmer, Erev Shchodesh, B'Shas Kriyas HaTorah. I don't know why he wrote Erev Shchodesh Kriyas HaTorah. Kriyas HaTorah we have on the Shchodesh. Not always do we have Kriyas HaTorah and the Erev Shchodesh. Maybe that's part of the deal. What? Maybe. But he doesn't write that. So that is the Chochmas order. The Moshe has a strange tshuva. The other day, and the Moshe says, "Isn't Kshedim is not a good answer because it's lawyer adaptations of that." And he says, "Bear kois, almost everybody is ed kosher. Why would this depend on el kois?" Maybe he's dealing with a special Heter Iska that is legally binding for people that are not totally from and they'll come to base. And so the Moshe says, "Bein keren, bein revach shiur." Wasn't the Moshe aware that there is no shiur bisman hazeh? I'm sure he was aware, but the Moshe says, "Eidim Shalem is very easy to bring, so it won't give the investor confidence, and therefore it should be shiur. But if shiur is totally impossible, then I think all the places we mentioned, there needs to be at least the possibility. So in my head, there is guy right that he needs to prove either al yedei Eidim Shalem or al yedei shiur. I don't want to ignore shiur because for the past 500 years since Tikkun Maharam, it's in the Heter Iska. So I write either Eidim or. So the bottom line is, since the days of the Tumas Hadesh until our day, 700 years, and the origin of the Heter Iska was the need to guarantee a profit for people if we want them to lend money, because otherwise people won't lend. So Baruch Hashem, the From Society, one of its amazing characteristics is the availability of money, which is interest-free, which is a Kiddush Hashem, because in the world, money is worth money, and money is supposed to generate money. And today in America, and as a sort of every film community, there are the merits for Sodom is something which is very, very available, and Baruch Hashem. So this week's parsha is in Kesef Talva Esami. And in Kesef Talva is a mitzvah, and not only a rishus, and that's a machilta quoted by the Rambam, the very first halacha in Hilchos Halvah. The Rambam writes that halvah is a mitzvah say. In Kesef Talva Esami is not rishus, but a mitzvah. But what is strange and baffling, there nowhere in the Poiskim is there Agadora. So how much money? How much? Regarding tzedakah, there is so much detail. Maisa, Choimish, and there's a huge discussion in all the places on what could be included in Maisa, from which monies do you need to take off Maisa. If mitzvah salvo is a mitzvah, nobody says how much, what conditions. So obviously it cannot be a choiva. If it would be a choiva, it needs to be detailed. Every choiva needs a haggadah. So halvo is a mitzvah. And the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, and Choshen Mishpat Tzaddik Zayin, right? Mitzvah tzedakah is bigger than mitzvah halvo is a greater mitzvah than tzedakah. If it's a greater mitzvah, then what are the dinim of halvo? Obviously, without ribbis, goes without saying, the very same posik in Kesef Tal Nesam Eloshia Lekenaisha, Loisasim Olav Neshach. But nowhere in the poskim is there Agdora how much money and from what money. So obviously, it's not a choiva like tzedakah. It's a reshus, but it's a mitzvah. And I wrote a great deal about this gather, mitzvah shel reshus. What? Im kesef tal v'sami could be a total reshus. You have no mitzvah at all. Kamashmalon, it's a mitzvah. V'yekabel sachar. But it's not a choiva. So in the yeshiva world, we know there are mitzvahs chiyuviyos, which are binding, and mitzvahs kiyumiyos. Mitzvahs kiyumiyos are dependent in a ma'aser shel reshus. Tzitzis. If you don't wear dalet kanfus, you don't have a chiyuv. But once you wear dalet kanfus, it becomes a chiyuv. Shlit. If you don't eat meat, don't have a mitzvah. But if you eat meat, it's a chiyuv. If you don't eat peres, it's a sore. You don't have a chiyuv. But if you do, it's a chiyuv. There's a concept, mitzvah shel reshus, which is never a chiyuv. Kiyum yeshbo, bitul einbo. And these are very few. Very few. According to the Gra Matzah called Shiur. And the only other mitzvah which is a total reshus is achilas truma lekolim. The Rambam writes the very last halacha in Hilchos Trumas. Kohen oichel truma mevorach hashekadishon v'tzeitzol amat shekadishon v'yitzol shalan v'tzivol olechel truma. But it's never a chiyuv. It's not like kodshim, which is a ma'isa. It's not like matzah and moreh. Kohen she'oichel truma is a mitzvah. Lo yochel, it's never an aveira. Kiyum yeshbo, bitul einbo. Halvoah would be the same. It's a huge mitzvah. It's not a chiyuv. If it would be a chiyuv, then we need to know how much. And that's a chiddush. And people are much more willing to give tzedakah than to lend money. I know people who are gewaldig about tzedakah, but you come to ask for a loan, the person would say, I'll give you a gift of $10,000, but I won't give you a loan of $50,000 or $20,000. Even though it's a mitzvah to say. I think that if people would be more diligent and more serious about Kriyas Bal Choyev mitzvah, it would be easier to find people that would be serious about them kesef Bal V'asami. But because, from my own personal experience, all the people I lent money with repay, I could buy a diva. Not that I'm at the school, but maybe in Vermont. And I really have no kpeda, because almost all the people on my left money don't have. If they don't have, they don't have. But people are not really makbid in Priyas Bal Choyev mitzvah. And Priyas Bal Choyev mitzvah, mesadren lebal Choyev. And mesadren lebal Choyev is very harsh. We leave him with very little. The basin will take away most of its possessions. They will live with 2 chairs and a little table. In the modern world, probably a fridge, even though in the Gemara and Choshen Mishpat, there is no discussion about whether he will be left with a fridge. Yeah. So I always say, if people would be more serious about Priyas Bal Choyev mitzvah, then many other people will be very serious about the mitzvah because of Tal V'asami. So today we discuss the evolution or the development of Heter Iska from the very first, with Thomas Edeshem, up to the modern Heter Iska, which is based on the Chochmah. What has changed? One component, which the Chochmah we do not find, but in later generations we do, that the person, the recipient of the money, who is the misasek, or he actually is a loiva, even though we don't want to call him a loiva, promises to invest your money, and I need to prove I am a shabed to this loiv, all my businesses and all my possessions. So even if I lost the money we planned to invest, but if I made money in any other area, it's mishubed to this chayv. And that makes it totally impossible for anybody to know. Because we had an interesting din Torah in our basement years ago, and I was very surprised. The person took a bank loan. He was a yesam, and it was a building project. And the bank agreed to come to my basement, which was a big chiddush. Of course, banks usually go to court. They would never come to basement. But the director of the bank knew me, and he had trust in my basement, and they agreed to buy the basement. And the person that borrowed the money wanted to patter himself based on the Heter Iska. And he had a very interesting argument. Every building project in SSR needs livui bankai. Because if people invest their only monies to buy a house, and the system in SSR is everybody tries to buy a house. In America, most people live on rentals. But in Israel, rentals are not practical, but there are no long-term rentals. So most people try to buy a house. So people are investing their hard-earned money. So every developer needs livui bankai, which means the bank is on top of him. Where is your money going? Especially if he's getting a mortgage, a bank mortgage. So the developer argued for the bank, I need to prove to you that I lost the money. You know that I lost the money. You ran my business. You are on top of every check that I wrote and every receipt that I get. So this is ridiculous. If the Heter Iska requires me to prove that I lost the money, you know better than I where the money went and what went wrong. So he wanted to rely on the Heter Iska to pat himself to pay the bank. However, in the modern Heter Iskas, he says, I need to pay this loan plus interest unless I made no money in any other investment I have. And the bank said, who knows? Maybe he has investments in other banks. Maybe he has, unofficial monies, like most of the Haredi system finances is black money and not white money. So the psak was that he needs to pay that money, and he cannot utilize the Heter Iska to not to pay back that money. But it was a very interesting discussion. So we discussed the Heter Iska, and the sheet is recorded. So even if you're not into the sugya right now, I think you will have it to edit from this year when you get to the sugya and go find Aleph and go find Zayin. Those are the primary sources of the Heter Iska.